Okay, let's just finish the language. Good morning, everyone. Let's just finish the language of this sif. And then I realized that we haven't yet done the Imrei Yaakov for the previous sif either, so we'll go back on that. So we said that causing someone pain does not necessarily entail insulting them, but even just making mention to something that is in their past that is not necessarily anything derogatory about them at all. Like to say, that you are a Baal Tshuva, or that your parents converted to Judaism. So uh, you know, my ancestors were in Europe and they were in the yeshivas and they were in the shtetelach. Yeah, but I guess you wouldn't know such things because your parents grew up, in Alberta or something like that, and that you may think that that's a harmless comment, but it may make the person feel very bad. Ve'ein tzarich lomar, and certainly it goes without saying, hamacharfa b'divrei ginai v'dofi, afilu beremes, that if you embarrass someone or you insult them with derogatory language, even if it's just by illusion, and we'll give some examples of that later on. Vafilu hu emes, and it's even if it's true, the guy's like we said, telling someone that they're not smart, even if it's true, is an isser of onas devar. Elo she'enu avon v'chet asher chata be'inyan shoroi levazoso. He says, but just because a person has a deficiency doesn't mean that they've committed a sin. Al derech sheyizbar sheish baze isser onas advar. He says sometimes when a person has committed a sin or he's guilty of sinful behavior, so then it is permitted to point it out to him, even if that will cause the person pain to remember what they've done wrong, but you're doing it for a constructive purpose to try and get them to do tshuva, so sometimes that'll be permitted. But to tell someone that they're not smart, or some other kind of insult they're not guilty of anything wrong for that kind of deficiency, or like that famous exchange between Winston Churchill and a lady at a party, where she said to him, "Sir, you are drunk," and he said, "And madam, you are ugly, but at least in the morning I will be sober." So that's a great retort, but it's also on Stevarm, because telling someone that they are ugly is not they're not guilty of anything wrong, of any wrongdoing. Milvad min iser lashon hara, and he says this is in addition to the prohibition of lashon hara, shehu afilu kishaomer kain shelo b'fanav, where lashon hara is usher both in the presence of a person about whom you're speaking, and even if they're not present. So there's an isser lashon hara plus an isser ona if it's done in their presence. V'chein hamakalalo b'fanav yesh bo mishum ona as devarim levad me'isser klala l'shum adam Yisrael. He says, and again, another type of doubling up would be as if you curse a fellow Jew, right? May God do something terrible to you, right? So that curse is it's usher to curse a fellow Jew. Shehu afilu shelo b'fanav kemo shekasav lo sekalel cheresh. And cursing a fellow Jew is an isser deoraisa. And in addition to the isser deoraisa of lo tekalel cheresh, do not curse the person who is deaf, meaning that whether or not they're aware of the curse or not, it's an isser, right? In addition to that is the isser of onas devarim. So the point that he's making at the end of this sif is that many times onas devarim is doubled up with another isser, whether it's an isser of lashon hara or an isser of a kalala, of the prohibition of cursing a fellow Jew. So there's so many things that the Torah does address to deal with derogatory speech that that one has to be aware of that. I was on a Zoom interview last night, and I was discussing what is prevalent in social media today, and that to my great disappointment, very from even rabbinic figures, even rabbis who who should know better, many times engage in onas devarim on social media, simply because we develop a different persona when we're on social media. Sometimes, just like when you get behind the steering wheel, you can develop road rage, even though that's not a part of your normal persona. But sometimes when we're in the privacy of our cars, sometimes the worst of us emerges because we view it as an outlet. So sometimes that the same thing happens in social media, and it's quite disappointing to see that emerge from people who ought to know better. Is that onas devarim applies whether it's the spoken word or the written word. Okay. So I want to go back and do the Imrei Yaakov commentary on both Chaf Zayin and Chaf Ches. So just to review, we had learned last time that just like there's there's two psukim in the Torah that refers to the prohibition of ona'ah, al tonu ishes achiv, that one may not oppress his brother. And then later on it says, velo sonu ishes amiso, let no man oppress his fellow. So why does the Torah mention this prohibition twice? So the Gemara's conclusion is that there's two types of ona'ah, ona'as mamon and ona'as devarim. There's oppression financial oppression, and then there's verbal oppression. And this is the issue that we're dealing with now. So the Imrei Yaakov writes, Zu onas devarim. He says, De onas mamon amor b'pasuk dela'el al tonu ishes achiv. I'm sorry, we did this one already, where we did Samach Aleph already, that we talked about two things in this piece. One was to give someone advice that is not beneficial for them is included in the Isser of Onas Devarim, that a person has to view himself as completely objective when he's giving others advice. And if he's asked his advice about something that he is subjective about, let's say, should I buy that house? Right? When the person who's asking doesn't realize that you yourself want to buy the house. So if someone comes to me and says, should I buy that house? What do you think? If I know that I'm completely subjective, I'm obligated to recuse myself. It would be an Isser Deoraisa for me to tell him, no, I don't think you should buy the house. And then I go ahead and buy the house a day later. That would be included in Onas Devarim. And then the Imrei Yaakov had also said in the same Sif Katan, he said that you have to be very careful about people who are more sensitive. So you have to be careful about women in general, your wife in particular, because women are prone to cry more easily. They're more sensitive. And one of the gates that has never been locked is the gate of tears. And also people who are the underprivileged, meaning people who are converts, widows, orphans. These are people who feel a sense of oppression anyway. Even within the Jewish community, they feel at a disadvantage, and therefore, if you say something to them that causes them pain, Hashem will respond more readily and more quickly. And then also another thing. And we had said that in some respects, Onas Devarim is worse than Onas Mamon. And the reason said the Rav Shulchan Aruch is Zu nitein lihi shavon v'zu lo nitna lihi shavon. That Onas Mamon, you can make restitution. You can repair the wrong that you've done by, let's say, I ripped someone off. I can do tshuva by giving them back their money. But with Onas Devarim, it's very hard to take something back that was said because there'll always be lingering feelings, yes? So, Vazu lo nitna lihi shavon. So the Imrei Yaakov just points out, he says, Ve'af al pi she'achar kach miratzehu b'dvarim, even though you may appease your friend and apologize for having said something insensitive, that was totally thoughtless, Mikol makom masha haya haya. But nonetheless, there's always going to be an imprint of those words, because biesh chaver bidvarim, and then as a result, the Imrei Yaakov says that that halachically, if a person does embarrass someone verbally, yesh omrim sheminadin oso ad sheyafuyas haimavuyash. There is an opinion in halacha, and it's brought down in Shulchan Aruch, that you put the offending party in nidui, you put him under a ban until his friend forgives him. Let's say there was a public shaming, middle of shul one Shabbos, a guy claps on the bima and says, "I want to tell you all about my former business partner. He's a crook, and he's a this, and he's a that." You think this never happened, but trust me, it's happened. And he does a public shaming of the guy who was just called up for the Shishi Aliyah, because he's so indignant that his fellow that he knows is such a bad person would be accorded this honor. Okay, so some say that the public shamer has to be put under a ban until the offended party forgives him. B'yesh omrim demakin oso makas mardus the over alav delosonu. Some say that the Beis Din, if should they have such jurisdiction, can even give him lashes for having violated this biblical commandment. Aval kevin shehu lav she'ein bo ma'isa ein loken alav malchus deoraisa. He says this type of lashing would not be a biblical lashing where the person gets 39 lashes, because there is no such punishment that is prescribed for this kind of violation, because it's called a lav she'ein bo ma'isa. It's called a violating a negative commandment which does not have any kind of physical act accompanying it. Va'ayin lekamen simin tes sif beis bilikutim uv'mekoro sham. He says we'll see later on a discussion of this idea in chapter 9 in Simin Tes. So Simin Tes, I'm just going to bring it up for a second. Simin Tes talks about physically assaulting someone. And in the course of discussing that, Hamakes chavero haka'a kala she'in bo shava pruta hol ve'in ba chiyuv mamon chayiv malchus min haTorah. That here, this is talking about nizke guf, causing damage to someone. And so the halacha is that if I damage someone, if I cause them bodily injury, I have to make compensation to them. That's standard halacha, that you have to compensate someone for the various costs incurred through the injury, even if it was unintentional. What if I injure someone less than a shava pruta? That means I punch them in the arm and the damage is not lasting, but I cause them pain. So there's no assessable damages, but I can get malchus midioraisa because I have committed flagrantly a violation of causing someone else injury. He says, and that's true even if I'm just retaliating against someone who has insulted me. I don't have a right to strike them. And so in the course of discussing that, the Imrei Yaakov just points out that there are certain prohibited curses that the Torah prohibits, and yet you still you don't get lashes for them. So, for example, he quotes the Shulchan Aruch that says that if you call your friend a mamzer, you call your friend a bastard, okay, or if you call your friend an apikores, you call him a heretic, This crosses the line as far as insults are concerned. And the rabbis said that in those kinds of situations, chayiv nida, chayiv nidui, the person who made the statement should be put under a ban by the community, because there are certain accusatory insults that so cross a line as far as being outside the pale of acceptable discourse, because what you're doing is you're assailing the character and suggesting that your friend is either a bastard so that he's not qualified to be part of the community, to marry into the community. You're questioning his whole status, his whole halachic status, or calling him an apikores could also land you in nidui. And if you call someone a heretic, you're chayiv nidui. The apikores who kofer b'torah. V'chein hakori lachaver rasha ben rasha tamei ben tamei. And similarly, if you call someone a rasha, or a rasha ben rasha, and they're not a rasha, so then you could also be put into nidui. Okay. Okay. Let us go back to our text. Okay. Okay. Vizu bimamono, and another reason why onoas devarim is worse than onoas mamon, we had said, is that onoas mamon is that you're only offending someone else financially, but here you're offending someone bodily. In other words, you're using your body, you're using your mouth to offend someone. You're not just using your assets to harm someone. Va'afta amru, hagozel lechavero shavapruta kilu gazel nishmaso, alma degamba onas mamon ika bahadayut tsar haguf. He says, you might argue that stealing something from someone is tantamount to causing them emotional harm, right? Because the Gemara says that even if you steal a small amount of money from someone, it's as if you're stealing their soul. And therefore, even onoas mamon causes a person emotional pain. So why is just insulting them worse than stealing from them? So sham mairi bira'av kaved ve'en lo bameh liknos, aval yeshnam harbi b'nei adam she'enam chaserim kol kach. He says the difference is that the Gemara over there, when it says that stealing even a small amount is like stealing their soul, is when you're stealing from them something that they need in order to sustain themselves. Like if it's a time of great poverty or a great famine, and you steal a crust of bread from someone and it's their last crust of bread, so then stealing from them is much worse, because you are potentially depriving them of what they need in order to survive. But under normal circumstances, if I steal a piece of bread from someone and they've got the whole loaf left to feed their family, then that's far less harmful than if I insult someone. Because at the end of the day, what did I do? I took something from you, but it doesn't harm you in any substantive way. But insulting you really does cause you emotional harm, and therefore it's much worse. Okay, and then we had said, the last Imrei Yaakov from the previous Sif had said that that anyone who cries out to God in pain because he was a victim of onas devarim, Hashem will respond to him immediately. So the Imrei Yaakov says, Yalfinan la b'gemara midichsiv, Hinei Hashem nitzav al chomat anach uviyado anach. The book of Amos, chapter 7, says that God is standing on the wall of Anach, and in his hand is an Anach. Now, normally that's translated that God is standing on a wall, and in his hand, I think the word Anach is usually translated as a measuring stick. But I'll get you the exact official translation. Amos, chapter 7. Yeah. And behold, the Lord stood upon a wall made by a plumb line, with a plumb line in his hand. It's a tool for a builder to make sure that everything is level when you're building a wall. And the Lord said to me, Amos, what do you see? And I said, a plumb line. Then said the Lord, behold, I will set a plumb line in the midst of my people Israel. I will never again pass by them. And the high places of Isaac shall be desolate, and the sanctuaries of Israel shall be laid to waste. And I will rise against the house of Yeravam with the sword. So basically, this was a prophecy that Amos had to punish the Jewish people, especially the Jews of the north, for their sinful behavior. But the Gemara says that the word anach doesn't just mean a plumb line, but rather it's a language of onah, because anach means he who has oppressed you. Umidichsiv nitzav al anach, and the fact that it says that God was standing on this, standing over the plumb line, mashma she'enu nitan lahamtin velisa avona. That means that God is right there. When a person commits an act of ona'ah, then Hashem is standing right over that offender. It's as if, in a figurative sense, that God sort of grabs that sin immediately upon its commission and is ready to punish for it right away. And it's because of that, the rabbis also said that all the gates are locked except for the gates of onah. When you verbally offend someone, so then those gates are not closed. I think maybe we should do the Gemara together. It's a Gemara in I believe it's a Gemara in the Bava Kama Gemara, but there's also a Gemara in Bava Metzia as well. We'll take a look at that in Mirza Shem tomorrow. So now we get to the Imrei Yaakov in Chavches, that the Imrei Yaakov picks up on the language that the Rav Shulchan Aruch used when he talked about the type of trickery or the type of practical joke that sometimes people play. He says, "V'chein lo yomer lechaber b'kama timkor chayfetz zeh v'hu eino chafetz liknoso." You're not allowed to go over to someone and just ask them, how much is this merchandise? How much does this cost? When you have absolutely no intention of buying it, or you have no money. Ela shekavanaso lahatos es chavero, but your whole objective is to in some way deceive the merchant, and so the Yetzer low. And then when your friend realizes that you never intended to buy it and you were just wasting his time, it's going to cause him emotional pain. So on that, the Imrei Yaakov comments and he says, Yakir chaver sheniskaven lahatoso, your friend will recognize, the merchant will recognize that you're just wasting his time and that you had no intention of buying it, and that will cause him anguish. Mashma di'im lo yakir, it sounds like from the language that if the merchant doesn't find out that you were doing this just wasting his time, sheratz lahatoso, afal pi she'eno rotzo liknoso, v'sholo rak mishum sherotzo ladasas mechir hachefetz me'izatam shehu mutar. The hare b'mitzius ein chaver nis'ane va'ain mashakosavti b'vi'ur. It sounds like what the Rav Shulchan Aruch is saying is that it's only going to be a problem of onas devarim if, when after you have this exchange, the merchant is in some way, his feelings are hurt not because you'd ended up not buying it, but because he recognizes that you never intended to buy it. There was never a chance of you buying it in the first place. Like the example I gave, you walked into a very expensive store and were asking about a very expensive piece of merchandise, and then the merchant realizes that you were just wasting his time. You're not in that financial bracket to be able to afford such a piece.
Rabbi, isn't there also some an issue here of you're also stealing his time because you have no intention of buying the product. You may have been just using him to get more information where you had intention of buying somewhere else. I mean, this often happens with car buying or other items, where you people are no intention of buying, just getting information. So you're stealing that person's time.
I agree with you. I think you're right. There are people who will go to a merchant, a bricks and mortar merchant, in order to find out how much the object is selling for, only to go on the internet afterwards and to search around to see if they can find it at a lower price than what is being offered locally. I don't think that that's usser unless you know for sure you're not going to buy from the bricks and mortar merchant. There are times when the bricks and mortar merchant can actually do better than what's being offered that's what's offered on Amazon. And so there's nothing wrong with you doing price comparison. But if you know for sure, like when I first got married, this is going back many years, there was a guy who was offering to sell us furniture from a catalog. And he said, go to a showroom, choose the piece of furniture that you like, and then come back to me, tell me what piece it is, what company it is, and I'll do a better price than whatever the guy is selling it for. Right. So in that situation, it was clear that that I wasn't going to be purchasing the item from the merchant that I was going to whose showroom that I was going, because I was immediately going to come back to the guy who could get it wholesale, and he was going to figure out how to get it for me for a lower price. So when you know in advance that you're just going to the showroom so that you can get a better price, but you want to be able to see the merchandise, and you want to spec it out, you want to feel it, you want to test drive it or whatever it is. So I believe that's true. I believe that is a problem of onas devarim, like you're saying, Ron, is that you're not only you're wasting his time, you're taking up you're taking up the time, you're using his showroom that's costing him money and costing him time when it's clear that there's no intention. And eventually these guys figure it out also when they recognize that a whole bunch of people are coming into their showroom without any intention of buying. So you're right. It could be actual gezel involved as well. But here we're talking about the emotional feelings of the merchant. And so the Imrei Yaakov says that from the language here, it sounds like that as long as he never finds out that you didn't have the intention to buy, there's no isser of onah because his feelings weren't hurt. So if you innocently walk into a store and ask how much is that item, and you say, okay, just thank you so much, I just wanted to know how much it is, maybe I'll think about it and I'll let you know. So there's no onas devarim because it didn't become self-apparent that you had never had any intention of buying it. Maybe you were just curious, you were going to think about it, and then maybe you will come back, you never know. But in this biurim over here, he's going to discuss that issue. That is it only usher of an isser onah when the guy finds out and his feelings are hurt because he just realized that he was played? Or is it possible that there's an isser even when he doesn't find out, but you're exploiting him in some way, even though he's totally ignorant about it? So we're gonna go over this piece of Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow, and we'll take a look at that as well. Okay. So I think this is a good place to hold it for today. And everyone have a good day. Talk to you.